can go ahead, if you will, and take your Bible. And y'all come on in. We are just getting started. But if you take your Bible to the book of Ruth, chapter number 1. Ruth chapter 1. Joshua, Judges, the Ruth. I'm so glad when I was a kid I learned the books of the Bible. It sure be so hard now to try to learn them books of the Bible. I can remember learning them as a kid. I don't know how long this study will go. I'm going to start a study on the subject of loyalty. And a lot of people, I'm convinced today, some people don't even know what the word loyalty, never heard the word loyalty, much less know what the meaning of loyalty is. And I want to look at some instances in the Bible of Christian loyalty. And there's different definitions as far as identical meanings to things. But if you think of character, Christian character, some of the things we want to develop as a Christian, one of them I would think would be loyalty. Loyalty is definitely a virtue. Loyalty seeks to honor God. It values the relationship. And the rewards of the faithfulness that God gives us. We think about being loyal. There's a lot of people, as Americans, we have lost a spirit of patriotism in our society today. There are Middle Eastern countries where their citizens are so loyal to whatever their belief system is. I mean, they're willing to strap bombs on themselves and blow themselves up. They're willing to fly planes into buildings over things. They're loyal to their cause or their belief. And, now in America, it's a shame that people that would go to the Olympics to represent their country would want to turn their back on the flag when the national anthem's being played, or they're hoping that they get a chance to hold a flag so they can light it on fire in front of the whole world. And man, where's the loyalty at? Where's the patriotism? You see, loyalty is a virtue. To be loyal is to be faithful, is to stick, to be committed. That word commitment is almost like a cuss word now, especially amongst Christians. The word commitment, being committed, I never forget years ago. Let me clarify, it was years ago, so nobody think I'm talking about here. But years ago, I was talking to a couple that visited a church and this, that, and the other. And I was talking to them about becoming members of this. And he said, we just right now, preacher, I just don't know if I can be committed. And I said, now, did your wife know you feel that way about commitment? Boy, he looked at me kind of funny, and, he kind of thought about it a minute, And maybe when I was younger, I said things I shouldn't have said like that. But, the point's there, commitment. Are we loyal? There's maybe a hymn in the book called Loyalty to Christ. I think it might not hurt every now and again to pull out a definition and define what these words mean that we sing about. Because I'm afraid there are a lot of people that don't understand what loyalty is. Marriages break up because spouses don't want to keep their commitments to be loyal to each other, for better or for worse. When you think of a biblical definition, I'm going to give just a small glimpse of a story here in a minute out of the book of Ruth. But when you could give like a biblical, just a layman's term of a definition of loyalty, and basically it'd be this: to stay faithful to a person or a cause because it is the right thing, a good thing, and a godly thing to do. Now think about that. Loyalty, to stay faithful to a person or a cause because it is the right thing, a good thing, and the godly thing to do. To stay committed, to stay loyal. And when you start looking in the Bible, a list of all the people in the Bible that loyalty was present in their life. Job chose not to curse God despite his many unreasonable sufferings. What did his wife tell him? Just curse God and die, He said, woman, you speak foolish things, What about Abraham? He chose not to question God when challenged to offer up his son Isaac, he remained devoted to God above everything else. He stayed loyal, even if it was going to cost him something. What about Joseph? Being betrayed by his brothers, suffered wrongly, accused and imprisoned, but not a word of complaint came from his mouth. Why? He had loyalty in his heart. Daniel refused to bow to the king despite the threat of being thrown into the lion's den. Why? Because he stayed loyal. Stayed loyal to God. And so I'm going to just show a picture today. You know, we was looking at, talking about Daniel and Job and these others that were Abraham, that were faithful directly to God, loyal to God. But let's look at another, maybe a more a human interest there, as we can see some loyalty. And it'll be in the book of Ruth. You look at chapter 1. And you could read the whole chapter, but for time's sake, I'm going to condense it. And I'm going to read a few verses, and I'll explain the background of the story. But in Ruth chapter 1, begin reading in verse 16. And Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me." And when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. Let's think about that story there for a moment. There's a conversation taking place between Naomi and Ruth. Now the story was this: you got a family of 4. Okay, you got a father, a mother, and 2 sons. And they're going to leave Judah, their homeland, because of a famine. And they would leave there going to look for food, looking for bread. And they find themselves in Moab. Now, if you know any of the history about Moab and, of course, Israel, they were not the best of friends. Moab caused a lot of problems. They were always one of the ones that looking to fight against Israel. And in typology, when you look at symbolism in the Bible, like Moab would be a type of the world. So you got this family leaving Israel, and they're headed, they're leaving the place of God, and they're going to the place of the world to look for bread. Okay, so that's the typology there. Now the father of the group is Elimelech. Okay, and he died not long after that journey they made to Moab. 10 years later, the 2 sons died. Okay, and it leaves behind the mother and the 2 women, because those sons had married Moabite women. So you got daughters of the Moabites. And so as a widow now, Naomi, she's got no man in the family. She's lost all standing in society. And she herself is now in a foreign land, because they didn't go and leave and go back. They went and they sojourned and they stayed there. Okay, so now she's in basically a foreign country. She has no man in the family. So she says to her 2 daughter-in-laws to go back, return to your mother's house. You're going to be better off there. And so that's in parts of the verses. The whole chapter I didn't read, but you can sense that Naomi's attempts at trying to convince them that she herself, she's got nothing left to offer them. She had nothing for them. She had nothing she could provide, no security, nothing. But after much urging, one of them, Orpah, is going to return back to Moab. And the other, Ruth, she's going to stay. She's going to stay. And we pick up some of that conversation there. And notice how she says, I want to stay with you. Now, interesting to me in the fact where she mentions there, it says, "Entreat me not to leave thee." She's talking about that urgency. Now, there's a convincing that's trying to go on with Naomi. She's trying to convince Ruth to leave. So that's why she says, "Entreat me not." Okay, so Ruth is speaking there, "to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I'm going to go." So you see here, there's something that prompted Ruth to want to stay with her mother-in-law, Naomi. It wasn't because Naomi had something to offer her as far as physical things. Notice that? There's no clear answer, but we can kind of get a hint from the exchange that took place in the verses that we read. They wept sorely. And I think about maybe the faithfulness that the mother had there, the mother-in-law. But both knew Naomi had nothing to offer them. And despite the difficulties, when you read through there, they had been together for a while. They had gone through so much together. What was it that maybe tipped the balance for Ruth to make her want to stay? We don't know 100%. But when we start putting pieces together, maybe the speculation is this, that Ruth, by her tone of conversation, saying, please, don't try to talk me out of this. I'm going to stay with you. To me, there's something already predetermined in her heart that she's going to stay. Okay? This is not something that happens on a whim. Okay? This is not just a quick emotional decision. She's already got it made up in her heart that she wants to stay with Naomi. Now, here's my thought process, because when you start reading on down through there, she mentions the fact that thy people shall be my people. Notice this, and thy God, my God. Could it be that there was something about Naomi's God that intrigued Ruth? Maybe though they had been through hard times together, obviously, but maybe there was something about the God of Israel that Ruth saw something in Naomi that we can't, when you read the Scriptures, there's a lot that we just, sometimes we try to imagine and put the picture together. But for her to have a predetermination in her heart, she said, your God's going to be my God. And then she goes on to say, in verse number 17, that the Lord, at the middle of 17, said, the Lord do so to me and more also. The Lord's going to deal with me bountifully as He's dealt with you. Notice she said, nothing but death is going to separate you and me. You know what we're seeing here tonight in this story? Loyalty. Loyalty. She's predetermined in her heart that she's going to stay. Ruth, I'm talking, is predetermined in her heart that she's going to stay by Naomi's side. Hey, times were hard, but there was something about the God of Israel, I personally believe, that attracted Ruth's attention to know that that Naomi believed in God. And so I'm going to give you just a few things tonight. We probably won't get through everything, but talking about loyalty. Loyalty. Loyalty is driven by a desire to honor God, to do the good thing, the right thing, and to do the will of God. That's what drives loyalty. When you think about being loyal, it doesn't mean that what you're going to choose to do is going to be easy. But because you believe in what you're doing, you believe in the cause of right, you believe in the just, you believe that you're doing the will of God, that you have a desire to honor God, and that's going to produce a loyalty to stay committed to what God has for you. Man, isn't it a sad society where there's no loyalty out there anymore? We live in a cutthroat society. No loyalty. No talking about that desire to do the good thing, to do the right thing, to follow the will of God. It's almost becoming few and far between. It's sad. But by now, Ruth has already gotten to know Israel's God through Naomi. She trusted God and was ready to let go of the false gods of Moab. She was seeing something. Listen, substance doesn't always produce. We think, well, if you got all this stuff, that means God's blessing you. Not so. There's a lot of people who've got a lot of stuff, but they don't have the peace of God in their heart. Amen. That's the difference. Okay? Listen, Brother Mike had a procedure done on Monday. We've had others that have stuff going on. Listen, when they wheel you back on a gurney and those doors close behind you, it don't matter how much money you got in the bank. It don't matter what kind of house you live in, what kind of car you drive. When they start injecting you and putting this stuff in, none of your worldly goods matter anymore. And it's something about going down that hallway and those doors close behind you. And all of a sudden, if you hadn't started talking to God, but before you count to 10 backwards, I believe you would already try to say a prayer or something. Why? Because you know that there's something far greater than what's right here before us. And that is God. And so we think about this idea of being loyal. Loyalty. It's not always about the easiest path. It's not always about having the least painful option. Can I pick on Miss Shirley? She's telling that story about that fall she had the other day. And she was there was a puddle of water. And she was trying to step over that puddle so her foot wouldn't get wet. Now, she wished she would have went ahead and got her feet wet. Huh? Because the outcome of trying to avoid something was greater than if she would have got her feet wet. You see, loyalty isn't always about the path of least resistance or the easiest path. Sometimes being loyal means we got to do something difficult, we got to do something tough, but we stay committed to that which is right. That's where people bail out. They don't stay committed to what is right. You see, loyalty is our willingness to stay devoted to the leadership of God. God's leading. What's happening with Ruth? Well, she's obeying God's call for her life. Never would she have imagined all that was going to happen in just a short period of time in her life. And I'll say a little bit more about that later, because you know that this is not the end of her story. Something wonderful is going to happen to Ruth a little bit later. You ever heard of a man named Boaz? And in the picture of typology in the Bible, Boaz is that kinsman redeemer. What a picture of Christ, who loves us, and that grace. Remember what Boaz had told his servants? Because you know that little woman was coming out there. He said, "Leave stuff out there on purpose." Y'all read that? Leave handfuls of purpose out there, so that she can come and glean. She was just coming gleaning whatever they had left over. But he loved her from afar, and he said, leave those handfuls of purpose. Whew. Don't that do something for you? I know it's Wednesday night, but I get a little, when I start thinking about those handfuls of purpose, when we didn't have a thought about God, he said, here's a little bit of grace over here. Here's a handful of grace over here. And if you start looking at your life, and all those examples of grace that was extended here and there and there, and all it was God was trying to draw you into Him. It's the goodness of God that leads us to repentance, the Bible says. We're talking about loyalty tonight. The rest of the story of the book of Ruth tells us that by her being loyal, she made the right choice. God did provide for them, particularly for Ruth herself. She's going to meet a man named Boaz, a relative of her late father-in-law, and she's going to start a new family. She had a son, and her son actually became the grandfather of King David. David was her great-grandson, and Jesus Christ came through this family line. He was of the house and lineage of David. We trace that all the way back to Ruth. Isn't that amazing? What if she hadn't been loyal? What if she hadn't followed that leadership of God in her life? What if she said, "No, I'm just going to stay where I am"? And Naomi trying to entreat her and urge her to not follow, but just stay. And she said, "No, I can't. I got to go with you." She didn't know what she could have never imagined what was going to happen to her down the road by meeting Boaz. But that never would have happened if she hadn't been loyal in her heart. Loyalty is driven by a desire to honor God, to do the good thing, the right thing, and to do the will of God. The second thing tonight is this. Loyalty values the relationship. Loyalty values the relationship. Let's talk about it. Loyalty is desire to honor God, do the right thing, do the good thing, and do the will of God. Loyalty values the relationship. Now, common sense points toward Ruth going back to her homeland, going back to Moab. Her options were better in Moab than living as a foreigner in Israel with Naomi. You got to remember, Naomi, all that time they've been in Moab, she lost her husband, she lost her sons. Remember, she became bitter at some things. She was ready to go back. Ruth would have been better off staying where she was. But her reply was a declaration of love. And if you want to be honest with, I'm not being twisted and all that, but we're talking about the loyalty there, that desire of just staying committed. All that she knew that her mother-in-law had been through. These are not, the words that she gives are actually, they almost sound like vows. I mean, she says, where thou go, I'm going to go. Whether thou diest, I will die. And there will I be buried, and so forth and so on. She sounds more committed than some people I know today. Why? Because loyalty values the relationship. Ruth's reply was a declaration of love. She said, I'm not going to leave you, Naomi. I'm not going to turn my back on you. I'm going to go wherever you go. Where you die, that's where I'm going to die. Where you're buried, that's where I'm going to be buried. Isn't that amazing? That amazes me. Ruth is not looking at her own interest, but to the interest of the other person. Now, in Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, that's what Paul, as far as he wrote that in regards to our relationship with Christ and so forth. Look not every man on his own needs and so forth. But we know that Christ put him, when we think about that, Christ willingly dying on the cross, giving up his life, putting our interest, our need before his own, dying in our place. Listen, there's a lot of people that are going to die and go to hell who didn't have to. Matter of fact, everybody who doesn't have to. But Christ put ourselves before him. He could have called 10,000 angels. He didn't. Father, not my will, but thine be done. If Ruth had cared for her own interest and got married and settled down and had a future for sure, if she would have just stayed in Moab, she didn't know what was going to happen. But her desire to be loyal was strong. Her desire was to be with Naomi, the one who had nothing to offer her. She wanted to preserve something valuable. And that was that relationship they had, what they had been through together. But people don't value relationships anymore. Isn't it sad? Isn't it sad? That the cutthroat society that we live in, that people, that you can do for people, and just like that, they turn on you in a heartbeat, cut your throat. And there's no loyalty there. And it just is sad. Many today, they give up on relationships for lesser things. And I wonder, how important is our relationships to us? Loyalty gives a high premium to the relationship. Whether it's in your marriage, whether in your family. I mentioned the country getting started. Sometimes I know it may be hard to be loyal to some of the things we're seeing. But yet, even in our church, how loyal are we? Are we committed to the cause of Christ? Have we put a high premium? I know it was 2 years ago I preached on church membership. I almost feel like I need to preach it again. People think church membership is nothing more than a country club membership. Pay your dues and show up when you want to, type of thing. Well, we got to understand there's got to be some loyalty. Yeah, you might work at a place, or some of you who don't work anymore as far as you're retired or whatever, but maybe you worked at a place where you dreaded going. Maybe you had a boss you dreaded seeing. But there was some loyalty there because, number one, you had a family to feed. You had responsibility to take care of, and you were loyal, even not in the best of conditions. Why? Because see, there's an integrity, there's a character, there's a virtue. There's people that they'll bend over backwards and crawl through whatever, or used to be. I don't even know if that. Let me retract that. Used to, people would on their sickest day would still go to work because they was loyal. I remember my daddy. He at his factory where he worked in Clarksdale, Mississippi. I want to say it was. I got the newspaper clipping at home, but I think it was 3 or 4 years in a row that he got the perfect attendance award. That never missed a day of work. And I'm talking about, we got people now that won't even go to work. They're begging people to work. I saw a sign, picture the other day. I don't know, one of them fast food places, but they put letters on the sign, and all the workers quit and told the manager, hey, we're going home. Put it out there on the sign. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Where's loyalty anymore? I try to teach my kids, okay, if you get a job, or when you get done with that job, if you find something else, give them a 2-week notice. Have some character about you. Be loyal to something. But I'm just afraid that today, and it even spills over into our church society, that just no more loyalty. May we all, if we haven't, or if we still have some loyalty, let's don't stop. Let's continue putting a premium on the relationships God has given us. We're going to stop there tonight. We may get another 1 or 2 sermons out of this, or studies out of this topic of loyalty.